Turn with me to Job chapter 28 tonight. Job chapter 28 for our Bible study. It's been a couple weeks since we've been in Job now. The last time we were in Job chapter 20 and 21, when Zophar and Job were speaking, and we looked at why do the wicked prosper that night, from chapter 21 mainly. Chapters 22 through 24 is Eliphaz and Job speaking. And last time we were here, it was the last time Zophar would speak in a speech. This was the last time in these chapters, 22 through 24, that Eliphaz would speak in a speech. And tonight we look at chapter 28, which is found within chapter 25 through 31. And this is the last time that Bildad will speak in a speech in the book of Job. Bildad, this is, I suppose, the shortest chapter in Job, the shortest speech of one of his friends. In chapter 25, it's just 6 verses. He says in verse 4, "How then can a man be just with God, or how can he be clean who is born of woman?" And then in verse 6, he says, "How much less man, that maggot, and the Son of Man, that worm." Again, it may appear like there's some truth, and there is truth in verse 4. How then can a man be just with God? And yet, in the context, his friends are saying, "Job, there's no way that you are right." The Bible says that Job is right, and Job has done right. So again, you see these false accusations. And then from chapter 26 all the way to chapter 31 is Job speaking. And this is the longest time that Job would speak uninterrupted. It's not the last time he'll speak, but it's his last speech of the book. So obviously we've not gone through every chapter, certainly not every verse, but we are approaching now in the book of Job somewhat toward the end and the climax when God speaks. And God speaks for 4 chapters at the end of the book. And Lord willing, in a few weeks, we will probably be there looking at that. But this is the last interaction that Job has with one of his friends. And in chapter 28, what we find, and what we're reminded of actually, is that the book of Job is a wisdom book. There's a lot about suffering, obviously. And I trust that you and I have been helped by seeing the suffering and the endurance of Job in this book. And though he's not been sinless, he hasn't. Overall, though, he certainly is a righteous man. And he has done well. And God has honored him. We learn through his example how to endure these terrible and awful things that come into our life. And yet, though there's so much suffering in Job, chapter 28 reminds us this is a wisdom book. And what we're going to look at tonight is this search for wisdom. This search for wisdom. And we're going to look at a few other places in the Bible at least. But basically, Job is here. He's speaking. He speaks this long chapter 28, about wisdom. And he is speaking toward his friends. This is the wisdom that his friends need. And this is actually the wisdom that Job has. And we'll look at that more later tonight. So let's start here. Anytime anybody has a question or a comment, please just let it be known, and maybe we'll have some good discussion tonight. Let's start here looking at these first 11 verses. Chapter 28 is broken up into 3 parts. The first part of the chapter is about man's search for treasure, man's search for money. And what you see in these chapters, in these verses, is that man's search for money, man's search for treasure, for material gain, his earnest search for these things shows us 2 things. First of all, it shows us that treasure can be found in the earth. And secondly, it shows us that man will seek for things that he wants in life. Man will seek after the things that he thinks are important. We'll look here starting in verse 1. "Surely there is a mine for silver, and a place where they refine gold. Surely there's a place like this. And these verses are describing ancient practices of mining, of searching under the ground. Iron is taken from the dust, and copper is smelted from rock. Man puts an end to darkness. Now, they didn't have flashlights back then. They had fire, though. Here you have something about man going under the ground, it looks like. He's taking fire, he's taking light with him. That's how desperate, that's how hard it is to find these treasures, and that's how desperate man is to find these treasures. It's hard to go down, it's hard to do these things. Man does it, though. And not only does he do it, but he continues to do it because he wants it more than, for some people, more than anything in life. Man puts an end to darkness, and to the farthest limit he searches out, the rock in gloom and deep shadow. He sinks a shaft far from habitation, forgotten by the foot. They hang and swing to and fro, far from men. The picture there is of somehow a man being lowered into some tunnel or into some cavern by a rope, maybe a basket, and he's looking for gems. He's searching. He's trying to find that treasure, that money that he wants. You know, I don't know much about this, but I come from coal mining area, East Kentucky, and I have heard stories of people talking. I remember hearing about how they would not only go, I think, miles under the ground, but they would actually go miles at an angle and get under a river and get coal. That's a place I don't want to ever be found. I don't want to ever be found down in a mine. There's a man in my home church in East Kentucky, if I remember rightly, he was saved in the coal mine. Under the ground, he became a Christian. And he's a faithful Christian to this day. But you see, even from modern times, but looking back here at ancient times, you see people, their life is put on the line, they're in danger, the conditions are terrible. Do you remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, but in West Virginia, when they had one of those coal mine, when it collapsed on itself, they spent, seems like 20-some days trying to dig people out of the coal mine. And men put their life on the line to go down, to dig, to find jewels. Well, that's not a modern thing. This is probably 4,000 years ago. And men are going under the ground. They're doing whatever it takes to find what they want. Look down in verse 7. The path no bird of prey knows. No bird has ever seen down there. Nor has the falcon's eye caught sight of it. The falcon that can see so well, you know, a bald eagle, my understanding is, can see at least a mile away a mouse in a field. Well, the falcon, though he can see so well, he's never seen what man does here. The proud beasts have not trodden it, nor has the fierce lion passed over it. The great lion has never even come down to this area. Only man has. Only man and their ambition, their work. By the way, Job is not saying this ambition is wrong. He's not saying this hard work is wrong. Thankfully, people work hard. They do this. They find these treasures and hopefully use it right. Verse 9, he puts his hand on the flint. Now listen to this next part. He overturns the mountains at the base. They're digging up the mountains. They're going perhaps under the mountains. This is before, if you go through East Kentucky, at times, literally, you're driving like this. Just in the mountains, up and down, up and down. And what you see is on top of the mountain, you'll see the very top of the mountain, who knows, 40, 50, 60 feet high. They have cut through this mountain. And the road, though you're going up that high, the road is still, though you're right here, at a certain level, on up, you can see they've gone right through this mountain. And on both sides is that mountain. And you can see the different layers of rock there that you're going through. Well, here is before modern technology, and it says here, he overturns the mountains at the base. They're working. They're striving. They're looking for treasure. They're looking for all these things. And then we'll just look in verse 11. He dams up the streams from flowing, and what is hidden He brings out to the light. This is a man as powerful as water is, as much destruction as water does. Man, even ancient man, will dam up the streams, make a dam, so he can look for treasure and try to find the things that are very much valuable for him. And what you see here, Job is talking about the treasures of the earth, and you see from this that the human race, if they really and truly want something, nothing can stop them. Have you ever felt like that before? Or maybe you've known people that nothing was going to stop them from accomplishing what they wanted. Most of the time this is bad. Not always though, certainly. But you think about money, you think about power, you think about fame, you think about influence, you think about fleshly things. I'm thinking right now of a few people today would know him. Some of you would though. A very famous golfer. And you know what he told people to do? He said to go out to the driving range and hit golf balls until your hand bleeds. You'll find your game, is what he was talking about. Hours and hours and hours. Another very famous golfer still today, he was spending hours on the driving range hitting with the wind blowing right in his face. And they asked somebody, why is he doing that for? And they said he's getting ready for the British Open. When somebody wants something, they'll get it. They'll strive. They'll go for it. They'll move mountains, literally and symbolically. Can you all think of anything in life or anybody you've known that's like this? Maybe for good motive, maybe for bad, but it just seems like nothing's going to get in their way. They're going to push through. They will get what they want. Can any of you, any examples pop in your mind when you think of that? The Olympics. That's right. You have athletes who train literally from maybe 5 years old to 18 or 20, all their life for maybe 10 minutes of a competition. The Olympics is like that. And no doubt the parents push really hard those people who want that. That's right, the Olympics. What else? What else do we have? The government. They want what they want. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, and I'm going to mention some about that in a minute. But yeah, you're right. You're right. What else? Yeah. Just these athletes, other fields. When you see somebody, and I'll just think of athletics, when you see an athlete at the highest level, you can almost guarantee he didn't get there by accident. It took literally sweat and blood to get where he or she is at. Anything else comes to mind? Well, here you have is Job telling us, not yet about wisdom, but he's getting there. And he's describing men, how much they will work and work. They'll go into places that seem to be hidden, but they'll drill down there, they'll dig down, they'll get what is precious, and they'll take it back with them. But this is wisdom now. Wisdom is not like that. And look what Job begins now to look at in this next part, starting in verse 12. But where can wisdom be found, Job says? And where is the place of understanding? Here's Job's answer. It's not here on earth. You see, if you weren't that interested back then in getting this precious metals that they're digging for here, you would never know they existed because you wouldn't dig down into the earth and find them. But they have found them. They dug down. They strive. They risked their life to go places where no one had ever gone to get these precious things. But what Job is saying here is this. Even if you try like that, on the earth, on your own, you can't find wisdom. Because wisdom's not on this earth. Verse 13, man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living, Job says. You want wisdom? In this world, in and of itself. Now, I'm speaking apart from God. That's what Job is looking at here. You can't find wisdom. Where do we look for wisdom today? We already had someone mention the government. Though government is ordained of God and government is very important, as far as the big scope of things, God gave us government. At the same time, who would want to gain wisdom from our government right now? You want to find wisdom from our government? You're looking in the wrong place. What about politics? Now, I know there's exceptions to this. I'm very thankful. But if you're looking for wisdom, are you going to look at politicians today? That's the very opposite of what I would want to look at. Again, there's exceptions. We know that. And yet at the same time, if my kids want to look at an example to follow after, I'm not going to send them to politicians. Especially those on a national level. It seems like, though certainly there's corruption on all levels, it seems like once you get to maybe a state or maybe a local level or a very local level, the corruption gets less and less. But still, I'm not going to send my kids to look at politicians for wisdom. What about popular culture? No. Let me read a passage from Luke 16. If you're ever wondering what God thinks of popular culture, you can find it in Luke chapter 16. It says in verse 14, now the Pharisees who were lovers of money were listening to all these things and were scoffing at Him. Pharisees loved money and they're laughing at Jesus for His teaching. Verse 15 now. And He said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. Now here's the statement. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. You want to know what God thinks of pop culture? He thinks it's detestable, is what He thinks. Don't go with the crowd. Don't go with what's popular today. You want to find wisdom? You can't look there. What about mainstream media? One of the last places I would ever want to look for wisdom is mainstream media. What about the academy? One of the last places I would ever want to try to find wisdom is at the academy. You think about Ivy League schools, whatever that means today. Princeton has a man, I believe, and I should have looked this up before service, I believe he teaches ethics at Princeton. He's a tenured professor who has taught for some years that in some cases it's okay to kill a child who hasn't turned 2 yet. Not before he's born, after he's born. If he's under 2 years old, in some cases at least, it's permissible to kill that child. He's teaching at an Ivy League college. He's tenured. Even some seminaries where I was at recently, I was talking to one of the students from a different country, and this student was talking about how in the seminaries in his country, the liberalism's coming into the churches and the ministers through the seminaries. And very much like that in many places, even in our own country. At the academics, the academy, the seminaries, what about science? Now, Christians should love science. God made science. The fact is this, the science has changed over and over these last 2 years, hasn't it? Who are the experts today? That's one of the bad things about all the chaos we've had almost in the last 2 years is we need experts, don't we? We need experts. The fact is this, experts have a bad name right now, and rightfully so. What about medicine? Now, we want medicine. We want good medicine, and yet how many people in the medicine companies are just after money? Millions and billions of dollars. You can't find wisdom there. What about the family? Here's what they're teaching today. Don't spank. You know what the Bible teaches? The Bible teaches to spank. Certainly the Bible teaches other types of discipline as well. The Bible is clear about corporal punishment, though. Very clear about that. And I fear, and this has been true I've heard another pastor speak about this, how the young families today are being more influenced by the worldly understanding of the family than they are the book of Proverbs. And people are teaching it's wrong to spank, it's wrong to do these things, when God says that's exactly what needs to be done. So you have all these different places in life. Where do you find wisdom at? There is no longer a safe place in America to find wisdom unless it's at the biblical local church. Look down here in verse 15. Pure gold cannot be given in exchange for it. Job is saying you can't find wisdom, but even if you could find wisdom, you couldn't buy it because you wouldn't have enough money. You have all these men, they're scraping, they're digging, they're finding everything they can deep down into the ground. They're trying to get anything they can, whatever they can get their hands on. And he says, when you find that, you still couldn't buy wisdom because wisdom is more valuable. Pure gold cannot be given in exchange for it, nor can silver be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. And he goes on and talks about how precious wisdom is, and you cannot buy it. It's too expensive, he says. And then look down in verse 20. Where then does wisdom come from? Are we without hope? And where is the place of understanding? Thus it is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the sky. The birds that fly so high and they see basically everything on earth. Job says they can't see wisdom though because it's not here. And then finally verse 22, Abaddon and Death say, with our ears we have heard a report of it. There's no wisdom in the land of the living, and even in the land of death, there's no wisdom. They've only heard a rumor, basically, about it. So Job says to us in verse 12 through 22 that wisdom cannot be found, and even if you could find it, you couldn't buy it. Now, let's pause there for a minute. When you think about man today, when I say man, I just mean humanity, Job says here that wisdom is more valuable than any of these material things, and yet so few people are even seeking after wisdom. Why do you all think that man is so slow to seek after wisdom for in this life? Why is he so slow to seek after wisdom? What do y'all think? Let's just use America for example, why do men and women in America, why are they so slow to even care about wisdom? To even want to search for wisdom? Why do they search after other things for? Okay. The easy way out. Okay? It's easy to get knowledge like that, isn't it? You may not be wise, but you have that knowledge. Okay? So you look for the easy way out. Why else? Yeah. About pleasure. Life is about pleasure. Who knows when you're going to die, so get all the pleasure you can. Get it all. They're looking in the wrong places, but they're at least, you're saying they're, okay. Well, what about this? Doesn't people's lack of interest and wisdom in the things of God show that they are spiritually dead to God? They don't have a relationship with God. They're not interested in spiritual things. They have a lack of knowledge about God. They have a lack of concern about eternity. Now, we're going to see in just a minute this, but if you fear God, You're concerned about the way you live, aren't you? If you believe that there's an eternity and a judgment, you're concerned about the way you live. But today, few churches really preach on eternity and judgment, and people don't fear that anymore. They just think they're going to live forever. Do you remember Larry King? Larry King, and in one sense, he didn't even believe in this, but he had his head frozen because he's hoping he'd come back to life one day. His head is frozen somewhere right now. He's hoping to be rejuvenated, brought back from the dead one day. And he was terrified of death. But we don't think about that. Well, here I want you to look now, starting in verse 23. And this is what Job is getting to in this chapter. Man searches for everything, though you can never find wisdom in this earth, and you couldn't even buy it if you could. But this is where wisdom is, Job says. Job says wisdom is with God and with Him alone. God understands its way, wisdom's way, and He knows its place. For He looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When He imparted weight to the wind and meted out the waters by measure, when He set a limit for the rain and a course for the thunderbolt, then He saw it and declared it. He established it and also searched it out. God knows wisdom. And here's the message He gives to man, verse 28. And to man He said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to depart from evil is understanding. You want to know what wisdom is? You want to know where to find wisdom? God says you find wisdom when you fear Me. That's the beginning of wisdom for man. Let me read a few places from Proverbs, a few famous verses. Proverbs 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. When the Bible says there that fools despise wisdom, that means they despise the fear of God. There's few things you could ever say worse about a person than to say that person doesn't fear God. I don't want to be around a person who doesn't fear God. He may kill me in my sleep to get my wallet. I don't want to be around a person who doesn't have a conscience, who knows what he could do. Well, here the Bible says that fools despise wisdom and instruction. They despise the fear of God. Listen to verse 29. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, Solomon says. Proverbs 3, verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Listen, there may be a lot of people in this world that knows a lot more than we know tonight. But if you're here tonight and you fear God and you turn away from evil, you've got something more precious than they'll ever know about. That the world may not think much of us tonight, but if you fear God and turn away from evil, you are the wise person in the room, not the worldly person. You may not have what they have. You may have not lived as nice a life or as comfortable a life as other people. The fact is this, if you fear God and turn away from evil, you're the wise person and the blessed person, not the other person who doesn't do that. Chapter 9, verse 10 of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Do you fear God? And do you turn away from evil? Then know this, God has given you something more precious than anything in this world. You would be better off with the fear of God than you would be with all the money in the world, a couple yachts, an early retirement, everything you could ever dream of, and no fear of God. You would be infinitely better to have the fear of God and to turn away from evil. God has given you. When you think of life in this way. Think of life as the way God views it. It doesn't matter how much material possessions a man have. It doesn't matter how much suffering he's gone through. If he fears God and turns away from evil and trusts in the Lord, that man is rich. That woman is rich. And God will take care of that person in the end. One thing you see here in verse 28 of Job 28 is that Job is this man. Job, in a sense, is saying to his friends, look, you can't search out for wisdom, but God has said the man that fears God and turns away from evil, he is the man who has wisdom, and that's me, Job says. That's me. Why are you persecuting me this way? Why are you turning on me this way? And what you see there, this should be a great comfort to those who have gone through, to Christian men and women who have gone through great difficulty in life, great suffering, and are still going through suffering and hardship. Know this, that even a wise man can suffer like this. And this does not mean God has rejected you. It does not mean that God has said no to you and says you're an unrighteous person. Well, let me ask you maybe two questions tonight. One question is this. If wisdom is this pricely, if wisdom is this wonderful and great, how much of our effort should be given to understanding more about this book? I mean, it's our life, isn't it? If this is where wisdom is found, and really, in a true sense, Job would say to us tonight, this is the only place that you can find wisdom. Now, you can find wisdom from a secular person who has some fear of God, who respects authority. Where did he get that from, though? See, that's it. He got that fear of God, that respect of authority from somewhere. Whether a godly mother or a godly father or grandmother or grandfather raised him up with some biblical principles. The fact is this, we got it from the Bible. And this is the key to our life and to wisdom, is this book here. Understanding this book, knowing the will of God for our life and embracing it, loving it. And then this question I would ask is this, for us to ask ourselves, is, are you a wise person? Are you a wise person? And according to Job chapter 28, verse 28, there is two criteria for wisdom. The fear of God and turning away from evil. That's the two criteria for wisdom. Are those two things. Well, is there any discussion tonight? Is there any comments about this theme of wisdom? Or maybe how it relates to another part of the Bible or another part of life? Any discussion that comes to mind tonight? Certainly discernment is involved in that. Probably the main thing for us is to dive into the Word, to listen to our brothers and sisters around us in the church, to help us, to pray. And if we want wisdom and discernment, it's going to be in this book here and in the local church. Any other thing comes to y'all's mind tonight? The Bible doesn't tell us for sure whether his friends were Christians or not. They are obviously doing terrible things to Job. They're tormenting him, giving him horrible advice. However, yes, I think they truly loved God and were doing terrible things, as sometimes Christians can do. One of the reasons, I'm going to turn to Job 42, chapter 42. And verse 8, now therefore take for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves, and my servant Job will pray for you, for I will accept him, so that I may not do with you according to your folly, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. And then actually in verse 9, it says, so Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord told them, and the Lord accepted Job. So for God to accept the sacrifices and to accept Job meant also, it appears to me that He accepted his friends there and forgave his friends. So, though the Bible doesn't make it clear, I think his friends did know God. Yeah, I don't know for sure. I would think, like Job's wife, I assume Job's wife was a true Christian who said something terrible. Christians can do bad things. Christians can believe bad things like Job's friends do here. But hopefully they repent and turn away from it. But who knows? I don't know if they were true believers or not there. Anything else?
I guess when you're in that position like Job was, had as much stuff as he had, I guess all what you're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you think... Yeah. When life completely evaporates, it seems like, that happened to Job and for his wife. Same thing, basically, except for the physical suffering on her own body that Job had and she didn't. But it says here that in the last chapter that Job has more children. It never says he remarried. I assume it's with the same wife still. So, though what Job's wife said is wrong, and Job does rebuke her, I don't want to give her too much slack, and yet she was under great temptation. It doesn't at all excuse her. But I assume that Job's wife was a Christian who made a terrible mistake and hopefully repented of her sin. Anybody else? Okay, well that's Job 28, the teaching on wisdom. We may look at possibly another speech of Job next time we're together, or we could go to Elihu. The Bible hasn't said anything about him yet, but it appears that he's been there maybe the whole time. Job has a fourth friend who speaks before God speaks in this book. So we may go there next in our study.